Hey guys, Dion Taylor here. This is another video where I'm going to show you how you can build a Power Automate flow, and this time I'm going to do that in combination with Dynamics 365 Field Service. So grab some popcorn, sit right back, and enjoy this video. So the scenario here is that we actually have a customer asset that also has child assets. And what we want to do here is we want to create an RMA, and then when we add a customer asset to that RMA as an RMA product, we want the Power Automate flow to check to see if that customer asset has child assets related to it. And if it does, then we want the Power Automate flow to automatically create these RMA products for each individual child asset. So I'm going to show you first what that looks like. So you can see here for a Datum Corporation, I have an elevator car, machine drive, guide rails, and a landing door that are all part of my parent asset, which is the elevator. So if I open up my elevator asset here, this is my elevator car. Let me actually go to my elevator. You can see all of those sub-devices, right? Those child assets related to this main elevator. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create an RMA here. So I'm just going to go here to inventory and then RMAs, and I'm going to create a new RMA. And the service account is a datum. Here we go. And we have the default price list from the Datum Corporation. And the system status is pending. That's fine. My processing action, because again, we only want this to happen if this is a return to warehouse. So I'm going to say return to warehouse, and I'm going to go ahead and save my RMA. Then I'm going to add my RMA products. So I'm going to create a new RMA product here, and the quantity is 1, and it's elevator 15488, and this is an elevator. So you can see that it then fills out my unit amount, total amount, etc. And then since this is a return to warehouse, I'm going to send this to my repair depot over here. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close that, and that should then kick off my Power Automate flow, which first of all is going to take a look and see if that asset has child assets related to it. And if that's the case, it's going to create a new RMA product for each individual child asset related to this elevator asset. So let's go ahead and refresh this. And we can now see we have RMA products for the elevator car, the machine drive, the guide rails, and the landing door, and the door open close relays as well. All right, so how did I do that? I'm going to show you how to create that Power Automate flow. Now, obviously, this is that flow that I created, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And then I will show you how exactly I created that flow. So the first thing I'm going to do is, obviously you can do this, right? You can add this into a solution. So you would go to solutions, you would create a new solution. So I have that already here. As you can see, add child assets to RMA. And then you'll notice in a second that that flow is already in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create this from scratch. So I'm going to say we're going to do a new automation, and it's a cloud flow, and that's an automated cloud flow, obviously. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And I'm not a big fan of this window, so I usually say skip here so that it loads this full screen for me. And then the first thing I do is I usually set a name for my flow. And I'm going to call this add child assets to RMA 2, right? Because we already have one. So the first thing we're going to do, because we want this to run when that first RMA product is added, I'm going to go and click here on Microsoft Dataverse. And I want to run this when a row is added, modified, or deleted. So I'm going to click on that. And obviously, I only want this to happen when a row is added. And then the table that I'm looking for is RMA products. Now, the scope, that's kind of up to you, right? What you want that to be. I'm going to actually say organization. And then I also want to do a little bit of filtering here because I only want this to run when that customer asset field on that RMA product actually has data in it, right? If it doesn't have data, then we really should not run this flow. So that's really all I'm going to do here in this first step in my trigger. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I need to get that ID of that customer asset that's on that RMA product. So I'm going to do new step. Again, I'm going to look for Microsoft Dataverse, and I'm going to look for get a row by ID because, again, we want to get that customer asset ID from that RMA product that triggered this flow, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say this is customer assets, and then the row ID is that customer asset. So you can just, right, customer asset, and we want to get the value of that. So you're going to click here on customer asset value, and that's your dynamic content. Now, there's nothing else that you have to do here. You could obviously filter some columns, right? Select certain columns, but I'm just going to leave it as is. And then what I'm going to do here is in my next step, I'm going to use this ID of that customer asset that's on that RMA product to actually see if it has any child records in there. So I'm going to click here on new step. And again, I'm going to do Microsoft Dataverse, and I'm going to look for list rows, right? I want to get a list of those child assets. And I can do that by, again, I'm going to list customer assets, and I'm going to go into my advanced options here. And what I want to do is I want to look at the parent asset field on that customer asset. And if that equals the actual customer asset, right, that actually is on that RMA product, those are the children. So that's the one that I want to get. So again, I'm going to say customer asset, and that's actually from the get a row by ID, right? So we're going to say here, this is my customer asset. Now, make sure that you actually put these brackets here in the beginning and at the end here as well, because otherwise it's really not going to work the way you want it to work. So now that I've done that, I can just go ahead and make this a little smaller here. I'm going to go ahead and save this for now because I don't want to lose anything here. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do here is I actually want some information from the products on there as well. And that's really the product of those customer assets, those child assets. I want to grab the product that's related to that asset for each individual child asset. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do another get a row by ID step. Oh, that's add a row. Let me just go ahead and delete that. I'm going to go ahead and again click Microsoft Dataverse, and then I want to do get a row by ID, and you'll notice that it now says get a row by ID 2, and I want to get products. Here we go. And what I want to do here is, again, I want to get the value from this list row, right? Because those are the output of that are my child assets. So what I want to put in here is I want to get the product from this list row step. So that's kind of what you see over here, list rows. And then again, I want the value, right? That unique identifier. So as soon as I click this, you'll notice that, see that? It now actually puts an apply to each step around this. Because again, when we're listing rows, we're going to have more than just one record that comes up, right? Could be multiple. So that's kind of why we're doing this. And then you can see here that what we've done here to get that product for each and individual one of those customer assets, those child assets, right? It's going to run that. So we're going to get that information here. Now, what I want to do in my next step is I only want to create those RMA products for that list of child assets if this initial RMA product that was created has a processing action of return to warehouse. So what I'm going to do here, that processing action is actually a option set, and that option set has values associated with that. So let me pull that up real quick so you can see what I'm talking about. So you'll notice here in a second when this field loads that this is actually a choice field. And we can see here, right, the return to warehouse, the change ownership, create RTV. Now, these actually also have values related to this. So if I click here on edit choice, you'll notice the values over here. So these are the values that I'm going to be using in my Power Automate flow, and particularly this one that says return to warehouse. So let's just go ahead and go back to our flow here. Now, in order to have different actions depending on that processing action, I'm going to actually add a switch here. So I'm going to click here inside of this apply to each box. I'm going to click add an action, and I'm going to be looking for that switch. So here you can see that. And now what I can do is I can have these different paths or cases, right? Depending on what value they selected for that processing action. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to select here my processing action. And here you go. That's from that first trigger. And then depending on that, remember we were looking at those values. So I'm going to say equals, right? This is that return to warehouse. So what you might want to do is just rename this and say return to warehouse. And then you can also add steps, logic, I should say, for other selections. So for example, if I wanted to do something else for an RTV, I know my value for RTV is this guy, and I can say this is my RTV, and that's the path it's going to follow if that processing action on that RMA product is an RTV. Now, for this video, I'm only going to add some logic here for the return to warehouse. So what I'm going to do here is now I'm going to create those additional RMA products based on, right, those child assets. So I'm going to go ahead here and add a new row. Again, I'm going to click on Microsoft Dataverse and I'm going to add a new row because, like I said, I'm going to create those RMA products for those child assets. So here we go with our RMA products. Now the item status can actually be set to pending because this is always going to be pending. So I don't have to enter that dynamic value, which I could do, but I'm not doing that. I'm just going to go ahead and manually select pending. Then the price list, it kind of depends on where you want to grab this from. You could grab this from the RMA, you could grab this from the account, right? So it really kind of depends on how you want to do that. Now I'm going to actually grab this price list directly from my RMA product. So I'm going to go ahead and search for price list here. So you can see here, get a row by ID 2, we have price list there, and get a row by ID 2, that is that product, right, that has that default price list. So you could grab it from there. It really kind of depends on what your setup is, but I can also say when a row is added, modified, or deleted, that is that initial RMA product that kicks off this flow. So you can grab it from there as well and just grab the same price list, right? So it's kind of up to you how you want to do that. What I actually did here is I actually grabbed it here from the get a row by ID too. So I'm looking at the default price list for that product. But you can also say, hey, I'm going to grab the price list that's on the account, right? You can do that as well. You would need to put an extra step in for that. So I'm going to go ahead, and again, you want to set this value field, right? And again, don't forget to make sure that you actually put that closing bracket on there as well. Then we have our processing action. Now, like we said earlier, this is a return to warehouse. So you could set this manually, or you can set this equally to what that the trigger was, right? Now, I'm not going to make this complicated. Again, this is a return to warehouse. So this one should be a return to warehouse as well. Then we have the product that's associated with this child, right? Like we got over here, this child customer asset. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and grab that product from that list row steps that we have here. So again, I'm going to say product, and again, we want to get that from that list row step, list rows, and again, product value. So we're grabbing the product from that child asset, and again, that closing bracket over here. I'm going to say my quantity is 1. In this scenario, my quantity is always going to be 1. And then we're going to have here, where should I link this RMA product to? So which RMA does it belong to? So in this case, I'm grabbing that again from that trigger, right? Again, make sure you put this correct naming convention in here. And I'm going to say RMA. And then here, this is my trigger, right? So again, we want the value, which is that unique identifier, and then that closing bracket here as well. Is the product taxable? Now, we have that information on the product itself, because remember, we were actually looking for a particular product for each individual child asset. So that's where I'm going to get that value from. So I'm just going to go ahead and click here on enter custom value, which is going to allow me to put in that dynamic content. So I'm going to say taxable. And again, I'm not grabbing that from my trigger. I'm grabbing that from my product. And the total amount is actually going to be my list price on my product. Again, what you could do here is you could have an additional list rows step, right, for your price list, and then grab the price there from that price list item. I'm just not going to make it that complicated. I'm just going to say this is going to be the list price over here that I'm putting in my total amount. My units, again, is also on my, coming from that list record step, right? Getting that, or I should say not list records, getting this row by ID from my product table. So again, for units, I'm going to go ahead and put in this UOMS, right? And then I'm going to be looking for my default unit. And this is, again, that get a row by ID 2, right? Which is exactly what we want here. This is that product, the product table, again, where this is coming from. So I'm going to go ahead and get the default unit, which is, again, a value. And again, closing that bracket over here. Then we have our unit amount. I'm going to set that the same as my total amount, because unit amount times 1, right, is going to be the same. So again, I'm going to say this is the list price here on my product. And then a couple of other things. I was actually having some issues with my currency. So if you need to set a currency, you can. Again, you need to set this to transaction currencies and then that opening bracket. And then again, you're going to do currency. And again, you can get this again from that product. So, right, get that row by ID 2. I'm going to set my currency value field, and again, that closing bracket. Now, here's the important part, right? Now we're tying this to that child asset. So my customer asset, opening bracket, I'm going to grab that customer asset from that list rows step, right, that we have. So I'm going to say here, customer asset. And again, we need to make sure that we're grabbing that from list rows, right? Here is my customer asset field. So I'm going to click on that. Again, that closing bracket. And let's see what else we want. Lastly, one more thing we need to do here. We need to tie this to the returning warehouse. So that's what you see over here, return to warehouse, right? So I'm going to go ahead and that's an account record, opening bracket, and the return to warehouse can come from, it's going to the same warehouse, obviously, as that initial RMA product that triggered this flow. So I'm going to say return to warehouse. And again, this is coming from my trigger. And this is the value, right? Again, that unique ID. We're going to close this bracket. And that is it. And then I'm going to go ahead and save that. And that is our flow here. Now, I did want to mention that there's actually a field that's called line order that's on the RMA product that by default is a business required field. So what I ended up doing is making that field not required or business recommended so that you don't have to put a value inside of Power Automate for that. So make sure that you do that as well. If you want to download a copy of this flow, I actually put this flow in a solution out there for you guys to download. This is an unmanaged solution, so you can kind of put it in your sandbox and take a look and see and play around and make some changes. Keep in mind, this is not yet ready to be going into production, right? I haven't done a lot of testing on it. This is more like a learning opportunity. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link to my blog in the description section. And from my blog, you can find the link to download this solution. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss another video again. Thanks again for watching. Until next time.